Hello everybody and welcome to another fantabulous episode of the MOC Spotlight, where we take apart what you build. For today's episode, we'll be taking a look at Élivágar, the Ice King, created and posted on our message boards by TheChosenOne. Before we get started, let me remind you of my method of reviewing, which involves a point system that is based on three fundamental attributes: the overall appearance of the MOC, the build of the MOC itself, and the concept and ideas behind the MOC's creation. Each quality will mount up to 5 points, leading up to a final score that will be determined at the end of the episode. And please remember that this is all based on my opinion. So let's get this started. Whoa, this looks like it could be the king of my refrigerator. I mean, this is really impressive. It's like Olaf from Frozen decided to pump iron for the sequel. On a more serious note, I gotta say, right off the bat, this is a really unique looking humanoid figure we have here, and it looks really impressive. The color scheme is just so pretty, and very fitting for the icy theme. And some features, such as the icicle armor pieces and the head design, crown, and all, stick out to me in a very distinguishable way. I feel like these aspects were handled so well and that they really define the MOC's character. Like, come on, this guy just looks so friggin' intimidating. Like, if you ticked him off, you'd get more than just a cold shoulder. You'll get it, like, physically to the face. So bow down to the king or die a cold, chilly death. Now, this Ice King also has some pretty decent looking proportions, but I couldn't help but notice that the arms look a little bit short and, just kind of stubby. I feel like these definitely could use a bit more length to them. Like, the elbow should at least be right beside the belly, not above. And also, in comparison to the other portions of this MOC, these arms look a little bit more on the slim side than they should be. Like, I would expect a lot more bulk, especially in this area, because in that regard, I feel like it would really add on to the whole concept of power. And, speaking of power, this guy packs way more than just his own bulk. No, he's going out there with a sword, this big freaking sword, and this even bigger freaking shield. Like, holy crap, these look cool. Like, the figure itself is so big, bulky, and heavily detailed, and just really cool looking by himself, but then he has these accessories which are just about as equally detailed and big and whatnot. I mean, man, I just can't stop staring at this shield. This is some crazy stuff here, and I really like that. I like that this mod gives you so much to look at without looking so busy. It has this coherent color scheme. And even though there's clearly a lot going on in terms of like detailing and all the parts that are thrown onto it, it doesn't look like a mess. It looks really fluid and well thought out. And like most MOCs that I've given the same amount of praise in terms of detailing, this MOC really exemplifies it in its head. Just this head alone represents the best part about this MOC's appearance. And then one last note about looks, I do really like how this necklace thing looks. I think that was a really cool idea to somehow incorporate more blue into the torso. And now, moving on to the build, I'd say that from head to toe, this MOC has a really well solidified construction. I mean, I would hope it was solid because, he's supposed to be the king of ice, and, if it was like liquid or gas, then it's really interesting to note how much of this MOC contains system parts. Like, I noticed that some portions of the MOC's construction is pretty much all system, and that's cool. You'll notice it with the ankles, the forearms, and some portions of the thighs have a good load of system in them. And usually I would be pretty concerned about this because system parts on purely Technic MOC, like, I don't know, it always seemed that these parts would just be a bit too fragile and too prone to falling apart for these kinds of figures. But I think that this MOC pulls it off pretty well, and at the same time it also finds some way to balance Technic Bionicle parts with system so that both are integrated in a way that makes this whole build solid. I don't really know if that makes sense, but I think you can easily piece together what I'm trying to say if you look hard enough. I don't know, just wishful thinking there. I guess an easier way of putting it would be that this guy clearly knew what he was doing with his system parts, especially since a majority of the details on this MOC's appearance are purely system. Like the face? The face, man, the face is like almost entirely system. Another thing worth noting is that this MOC has pretty much all the basic points of articulation, you know, articulated legs, articulated arms and wrists, and articulated neck, shoulders, whatnot. But it also seems like some of these points are a bit restricted. Like at first I noticed that the elbows seem to be a little restricted by this part over here that blocks off from bending all the way upward, you know? And then there's these icicle armor pieces over the thighs that have me questioning whether or not you can really move the legs up and down or anything like that. I mean, at least the knees can still bend without much issue, but it is still worth bringing up. And then going a little bit lower, you'll also see that the feet have a really unorthodox connection to the legs, and thus the articulation here is also hindered. So with all that said, it doesn't look like this figure is really all that posable, which is a little bit disappointing, but hey, at least it still looks cool, right? Because with all these details and the handling of system and whatnot, I'd say this is a really creative build. I mean, come on, let's look at that shield again. That is some crazy stuff right there, right? That just looks so cool and really well built. And on a final note about the MOC's build, it appears as though there are no functions, but the MOC is able to wield a sword and shield, and so I'd count that as a pretty neat play feature, but, you know, not much else to really praise. Now, conceptually, I'd say this is a really cool MOC, and, you know, no pun intended. Like, you know, one good look at this MOC and I instantly thought, wow, this is a really good idea. I'm glad somebody came up with this. The big idea was to create a mighty, ancient, evil, ice god lord thing, with most of the focus really going towards the evil ice being thing, and all those other details coming into play later. And you know what? I think that concept was communicated really well with this MOC. He looks icy, he looks menacing and powerful. This MOC evokes all those ideas really well. I can easily see it. You know, he's got the crown, he's got this evil looking insectoid almost like face thing going on. He's got a mighty sword and shield. He's got all these qualities that would fit that description if I were to try and imagine it. But, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I do feel like the arms should have been a lot bigger and longer, because that really would have sold the whole powerful thing. Because I'm looking at this dude's arms and, you know, they don't overshadow the rest of the MOC's awesomeness, but I do think that they take away from the whole mighty aspect. Like, when I hear the word mighty, I think of, like, Thor with his big ol' arms swinging his big ol' hammer. And then I look at this guy, and it looks like he struggles doing pull-ups, because not only does he have tiny arms, but he also can't really bend them all that far. So I do feel like there is a bit to improve on, but overall, I'd say the goal was achieved pretty well. So, with all that said, allow me to move on to the final scores and get this video all wrapped up with. So in terms of appearance, this MOC receives a 4.5 out of 5. I gotta say, I really liked looking at this MOC. You know, it's got this gorgeous color scheme. Like, man, those blues just look so good. And then there's this sheer amount of detail put into it that just keeps me wondering, like, wow, how did somebody come up with all this? But my one big complaint would be that the arms, yeah, you know. In terms of the build, this MOC receives a 4 out of 5. It's probably one of the best examples of integrating system and Technic / BIONICLE into one MOC, because it does it so seamlessly and so well that the MOC still turned out structurally stable and really good looking. Like, there's some pretty creative stuff going on here. However, it does lack functionality, and the posability appears to be quite limited. So while having a function isn't necessarily required for it to be a good MOC, there is still something to be improved on. And in terms of the concept, this MOC receives a 4.5 out of 5. It's supposed to be this really menacing, evil Ice Lord thing, and you know what? It looks pretty much like that. You know, I think it captures that whole idea really well. However, I still see room for improvement. But seeing as it's a rather minor improvement to be made, there's all too much to call out on. So, with all that said, we are left with a final score, and that final score adds up to a 13 out of 15. Great job to you, TheChosenOne. You did really good with this MOC. I mean, it's practically dripping of creativity, or maybe it's just melting because of how icy it is. Ha ha. Is it hot in here or is it just me? Now anyway, I do hope to see more out of you, and I do hope to see more out of you viewers. If you post your own LEGO creations to the LEGO creations category under our message boards at board.ttvpodcast.com, you too may have an opportunity of being featured on a future MOC Spotlight. So please, get to it if you haven't already. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.